Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and what was that other one somebody told me recently? Good work? No, it was good riddance. Good riddance. I think it was Chazon that said that. So I wouldn't be that rude, but then I'm not Chazon. So interesting title today. Laughing at aliens. Laughing at aliens. What the hell is he going to talk about now? Well, I'm going to talk about that. So that talk came out of watching a news program this morning where someone mentioned something about an obelisk out in the desert somewhere that was stolen. That there was some talk that it was left there by aliens, and the two news reporters, ha 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 ha. Not a good idea, even though the aliens are probably laughing at us for thousands of years. So what am I saying here? I'm not here to promote belief in any damn thing, especially aliens, or disbelief, or ignoring it. As I say often, don't believe it, don't disbelieve it, don't look away. DD, don't disbelieve, don't DB, DDB, and DLA. Yes, that'll help you. Don't look away. And one of the ways we look away is to hear something, and immediately our ideas, our opinions, our judgments come up and connect right with that. It's just like, that can't be true. We might not even say that can't be true. We just laugh and leave it at that. So people, living beings that I have met, and some of you have met, and some of you may even have met other consciousnesses, other forms of consciousness. As far as I'm concerned, this is what this establishment of the Order of Immediate Light is about, is to protect this mandala so that we're not limited to just traditional Soto Zen forms or Tibetan forms or Kagyu forms. I am interested in consciousness and have been way before I started practicing this as a spiritual path. I've been looking into it for a long time, reading everything I could find on that had anything to do with how the mind works, what consciousness is. What is this? What is this? What is it? Find out. You won't believe and shouldn't believe anything anybody tells you. If I function as your teacher, that must mean you're functioning as a student, then I would say, I can tell you conceptually it's not separate. But you have to see that. You might come up with different words for that if you see what this is fundamentally. In other words, if you awaken to your true self. We use the idea of delusion and enlightenment in order to train, but fundamental understanding, neither one of those applies at all. So what I'm saying is there's different levels, different layers of consciousness. And if you're training your mind, if you're sitting down and wall gazing, then you are entering those areas, those dimensions of your mind that you can't actually go with the thinking process. I'm not saying the thinking process can't tag along. Of course it can. But to lead with the awareness, to observe what's arising, to observe, to receive what's arising, this is the way we go into what's could be called the last frontier. You could probably do this on your own. You could do it as a scientist. You could do it as you could investigate things from that particular direction. But it seems to be the most workable way to do it is to do it with do it with your consciousness, with your awareness. Actually, you could say, use the awareness to look deeper into this, not just be stopped by your concepts, your opinions, your laughing at aliens. Ha 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 ha. It's not funny, and especially not funny to people who have been terrorized over and over and over again by what appear to be other beings, grasshopper-like beings. There's even agreement, if you read any of the literature, and I've read more than I care to name on that for the last half a century, there's much differentiation between how they look, what they do, and a lot of it has to do with how that particular person interacts with them. If it's totally fear, then they don't get much. But if there's any curiosity at all, then they can actually converse with that dimension that we refer to as alien. You notice I'm saying that dimension. I have no idea what it is. But I like to say it this way: we should meet everything where it's at. If you're depressed, meet it where it's at. Don't go behind the word depression. Find out what this is fundamentally. If you find out what it is, you may not be able to even describe this to someone else. And if you fundamentally find out what the whole thing is, your life, your being a living being, you won't want to describe it to anybody else, because you will realize they have to see it themselves. Have to be who you are genuinely. So I was just going to read off a few just for those of you who have an interest. And this will be on YouTube, so you'll be able to go and write it down later. Abduction by John Mack, head of Harvard Department of Psychiatry. Passed away 15 years ago, I think, something like that. But had a book called, several books, but the one that I read that I would recommend is Abduction. So I think there's 7 different cases that he dealt with. There's a lot of scorn towards this head of the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard from his people around him, because they wanted to laugh at it or put it, not investigate it, not look at it. So he was an investigator. Encounters by Dr. Edith Fiore, who's is now retired, lives in Florida. She has several other books on past life material, and also other so-called entities or ghosts. Up to you. I'm not recommending this. I'm just saying, if you want to, here's a few. Bud Hopkins, his book is Intruders. He has several of them, probably half a dozen. Glimpses of Other Realities by Linda Moulton Howe. She also has half a dozen or more books. Symbiosis by Nancy Tremaine. We were very astonishing, very strange kind of interaction with beings that we would refer to as aliens. I don't know if she would do that. And she actually came to the monastery and gave a presentation on her experiences a couple of years ago. So some of you were here. Here's one that I've not read, but I have as a reference: UFOs and the National Security State by Richard M. Dolan. And this is just material of how this has been covered up by the government. All kinds of things, just extensive. Everybody's heard about UFOs and aliens. But most of the time we just disregard it. Why? We can, because they're not in our face. They're not interested in talking to primitive people particularly. But they are interested in how we're functioning and what they can do, probably to keep us from wiping ourselves out. So anyway, there's a lot of material there. You can check it out if you want, or do something else. As I said, even though the title of the talk is laughing at aliens, what I'm saying, don't laugh at anything. If you spontaneously laugh, then you should look at what you're laughing at and see if you're actually laughing at what is humorous or outrageous or ridiculous, or at your idea about it, which is covering up the fundamental nature of what that actually is, if you were to just receive it. If you receive something, you don't know what it is. Just like if you meet a person, even if it's your spouse or your child, if you meet them where they're at, you won't know what's up with them. Because if you do, this is your idea about them. This is why it's so difficult to, raise children? What a ridiculous statement. The only thing you can do with children is protect them from things that are so innocent that they might hurt themselves or bump into something or go without eating. And maybe they should go without eating. They don't feel like eating. Might want to trust their digestive tract rather than your own. Speculations about children's digestive tracts. Clean your plate, or what do they call those? Desserts. Don't get any dessert. I'm just repeating what happened to me. So what I'm saying is I'm saying this talk is about, and I'm happy to respond to correction. I don't care what it is. I'm just trying to encourage you, all of us, to look deeply into everything. Take nothing for granted. Buddhism is just going into the wilderness that we call the mind. It is not a belief system. There's nothing to, if you're believing in Buddhism, this is not what the Buddha taught. He didn't say, believe in me and follow me. On the other hand, people that came to him, as far as I can tell from what the history says, is he, insofar as he could, he met them where they were at. And that you know how difficult it is to meet someone where they're at, especially if you're tumbling around in your own wilderness, not knowing who you are, where you're going, what's up, what's down, why you're having this feeling, why you're having that feeling, why you're suddenly feeling at odds with something or suffering about something or feeling with no particular story around it. What we do, generally, unless you're a meditator, meditators don't do this so quickly because they've been looking at the mind for a while. So they're more apt to have the ability to hang out in not knowing or emptiness or relative emptiness of the mind, not knowing what the hell this is. You can do that. I'll help you insofar as you allow me to. And that doesn't just mean, yeah, Sokuzan, go ahead, help me. You know what I'm talking about. It takes a lot more than that.
Nice show, Bonnie.
Nice show.
Do we as humans show up in the deep consciousness of beings from other realms, Alan?
Well, I don't know that, but more than likely, from what I've been looking at, not only reading about it, but actually working with people's deep consciousness with purpose, going into deep consciousness. I've been doing this for longer than I've been meditating. I've been talking to people about deeper levels of their consciousness. But I don't promote it. Some of you might have known me for a long time, and I may have never mentioned it because I'm not here to promote things particularly. That being said, here I am talking about laughing at aliens. So there's something happening here, but it has something to do with the order of immediate light and wanting to expand this way of working with the consciousness, just like we do brush and ink awareness practice. That has a particular dynamic that I handle a little bit differently than my teacher, the Dorje Drodl of Mukpo or Chogyam Trungpa taught. Different than what he was doing. Opening the eye mind, which is something else we'll do if those of you who join us for the Ango practice, and also a White Tara practice, which have a very specific way of talking about the practice of White Tara, which is a traditional Tibetan practice that shows up in all the main lineages of Tibetan Buddhism. That's deity yoga. And then the last day, I'll actually do some deep consciousness with the fourth day of Ango, do some deep consciousness work with people in our Sangha that are mediumistic, that have a natural ability to go deeply into consciousness just on their own. They don't need facilitation. They're there half the time anyway. But with facilitation, then you can actually do some deliberate exploration there in terms of the way consciousness works in each person. So I would say, to go back to your question, nice show, I would say yes, overlapping and underlapping and everything is probably happening all over the place. I find it with people who have this is what psychiatry calls it. I don't call it this, but they call it multiple identity disorders, something like that. Because it's like a disorder that there's different consciousnesses operating in someone. I don't think that's a disorder. I think it's just what's happening. To say it's a disorder is to say it's wrong, then immediately we start shutting down on it. And what do we try to do? We try to correct it, fix it based on what? Our preconceptions about what's happening. We think one person came up with a bunch of different personalities. Probably not. Those are entities. Or not. Maybe they're not. Maybe psychiatry in this situation, and then the third person over, the next one, yeah, that actually is someone with multiple. But this other person, they're actually separate identities that are showing. So, but science wants to lock down on something. It doesn't want to investigate. It will investigate if it's forced to, or if a pioneer comes along and looks at something they're curious about and just decides to go in there in spite of what all of his or her cohorts say. We're going to go in and find out what this is. So pioneering mentality or functioning sometimes shows up in any area, science or spiritual path.
Shoka has a question. He says, or asks, many people you have referenced have experienced difficulty with others when talking about their experiences. How does someone work with the intense feelings of isolation or alienation when the culture around these experiences often respond harshly, sometimes going as far as physical violence?
Yes. Realize your true nature. That was Shoka. You're a monk. Practice the way. You're already fully ordained as a monk. You have a strong path. You have a strong Sangha. A lot of monks don't have that. They have a community of people who are also monks, but they don't have this kind of a Sangha. And you have a really strong, mean teacher who won't hesitate to knock you off your feet if you need it, with your permission. So train the basic consciousness that is receiving what you just described. Whatever you're describing is relatively accurate, but it is tied in with karmic, not only the karmic outflows or asravas, I think is a Sanskrit word, of other people projecting this and projecting that and believing this and believing that. This is where wars start. Don't do that. Don't go there. Don't believe it. Don't disbelieve it. Don't look away. This doesn't mean you're not feeling it. I'm not saying shut down on the feeling. If the feeling arises, it comes up. It's dependently arisen, but it is unreal. When I say it's unreal, I'm not saying you're not feeling it. Of course, the feeling is feeling. You have nerve endings in the 5 sense fields and the mind, even more sensitive in the mind than just the fingertips, or the eye tips, or the ear tips, or the tip of your tongue. So insofar as you can receive with no comment. It's difficult. I know it's hard. I know it's hard to just have emotions and feelings without abandoning them for some idea about them. Just like it's difficult for those psychiatrists or therapists who dealing with somebody with multiple personality disorders, so-called, for them to not be able to go in and deal with the situation as it appears, as it is, rather than they have to go back and back out of it so that they can have what? Objectivity? No, it's not objectivity. That's protecting yourself from the unknown, because multiple identity disorder are that when various so-called discrete entities arise within the mind stream of a sovereign being, that should be looked at more closely, because it shows up differently. Each time you look, it shows up a different way. It won't hold still for even commentary, because the next time you do it, it's shifted, it's different. And yes, I'm not asking you to believe in aliens. That's not what this is about. But also don't disbelieve that area, because whatever is called that, or extraterrestrials or whatever, is happening in some way. But they, whatever that consciousness is that operates that way, doesn't particularly want to snuggle up to us. Just wants to experiment with us. So, go ahead, please.
You were bringing up a bunch of books around aliens and UFOs, and it reminded me of, there's a lot of information with different drug experiences, and I'm thinking particularly dissociatives, where at a certain level you can read about people's experiences, and after a certain point there's consistently meetings with different beings, and those might show up as different to the people, but pretty consistently there's something that looks like other beings.
Yes.
What's the relationship to our perception and what beings can show up within that?
So the consciousness doesn't belong to anyone, but it shows up as the human form. But when the human form is gone, you may show up as another human form, it's sometimes called reincarnation or rebirth, or it may not, may never be a human being again, or may divide up into parts and go into different directions, into different beings, into different worlds. If that's what you're asking me. And as far as drugs like LSD, which I know what that experience is like. I've done that, so I know what it's like, and it is a crazy ride in consciousness to use that. And I've not taken ayahuasca, but I know people who have, and it's interesting thing about ayahuasca is it seems to be very different for each person. It seems to be there's a lot of contrast with any drug, especially lysergic acid diethylamide. Different experiences. Some people really like that, really want to do that. Some people don't want to ever do that again. So those drugs tend to, because they're just drugs, they just go in and do whatever they do in the mind stream or in that aspect of consciousness that we don't fully understand what the mechanics are, particularly. Some people promote and use ayahuasca as a way of dealing with your life, with your problems, with whatever it may be. And other people just do different directions. So it's as soon as you start to go into consciousness, even if we're sitting right here, as soon as you start to go into any kind of deep area of consciousness, it becomes extremely personal and individual relative to your particular the karma and the way you handle what arises. If the way you handle what arises is to cover up, you're not going to see much. All you're going to see is you might see something, but it's probably running out the doorway. So it takes a lot of, you could say, bravery to just look at what arises without adding anything onto it. Don't close any doors. You might even find yourself actually opening a door. It's called a Dharma gate. And how do we do that? Look at it until it opens. Yes, sir.
You brought up just the concept of reincarnation. And I'm wondering, is having a drug experience or any kind of experience a kind of reincarnation?
It's a rebirth. Every time you go to sleep and wake up, it's a rebirth. Every time you go from one room to another, every time you have a gap in your thought processes, rebirth, because the body-mind complex is here and is moving through time like the hands on a clock, slowly getting older. That kind of movement, watching ourselves age, watching the sun and the moon turn around like clock hands, we impute that we have some kind of continuity as a particular entity. But is that true? And then when we take drugs, then that goes in and moves that consciousness in all different kinds of directions, based on the causes and conditions that arise in this lifetime and other lifetimes, not separate from anything anywhere. Also, not necessarily connected in the way you might think, and not actually a connection like an extension cord going from the house down to the retreat hut. Sorry, that's the image that came up. But so it's not connected in that way. It's not like a linear situation. It can't really be traced in that way. If you have more about that question, or if I didn't respond to that in a way that's helpful, you can ask me again or ask me another question.
I know for me, like going into Buddhism, when I started reading and studying under you, there's a lot of concepts that, at least on my end, seem to validate some of the psychedelic experiences I had, because at least there didn't seem to be any conceptual structures that supported that in my upbringing. So is there any validity to an experience?
Is there any validity to any experience?
Yes.
What do you mean by experience? And then as soon as you define that for me, what do you mean by validity? You're asking me questions. I need to know what you mean by those. I can't respond until you do, because my response is going to be no. Because those two situations point to something that is conceptually loaded and actually prevents us from seeing the emptiness that is covered up by those conclusions or those ideas or those structures. Go ahead.
What is the emptiness that's being pointed to in the teachings?
As I think I said earlier, confusion or delusion and enlightenment they're two things: night and day, up and down, back and forth, right and wrong. All the polarities, they get their meaning from each other. But the path The delusion, if you look at the delusion until you see that it is not separate from enlightenment, then both of them, insofar as they have some kind of a status as something, they vanish. Then there isn't anything else. There's no one even looking at it, and there's nothing being looked at. It's sometimes called emptiness, sometimes called suchness, sometimes called Tathagata. I mean, there's all kinds of words that those who have understood this in past times have used to point at that, to help us who are struggling with suffering in the world and with just being a human being. More? There is no conclusion. I'm saying there's nowhere to go. Go ahead, Junchu.
There's a couple of questions from YouTube.
Okay.
Melissa Lewis asks, "What is a strong Sangha?"
A Sangha that meets and hangs together and supports each other in practice and in study, and someone that you can be with and can support you as a companion or Kalyana Mitra, companion on the path, but doesn't interfere with your neurosis or correct you, doesn't interfere with that without your permission. They might ask you about something, then you might be able to discuss it, but no correcting. And no Sangha, if you have a teacher, which in this case you do, no teaching each other. Don't teach anybody anything. Receive, 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 receive. You want to teach somebody? Come and teach me. I'll listen to you. So the Sangha is the Buddha is the example, which if you don't have a living Buddha, you have to have whatever teacher is available that you can have some confidence in. And then the Dharma is the truth that is taught. Everything is dependently arisen. Nothing comes from its own side as an independent entity or self. Everything is impermanent. Nothing lasts. Nothing. All compounded things will vanish. And life is suffering or discontent. This is not nihilism. This is just the truth. You have a bunch of nerve endings that are abraded much more than they're stroked. And the community, or that group of people who you can be with, that you don't lean on, but you walk with them, you don't lean on them. That's called ordinary friendship, is the kind of friendship where they can see your craziness, but they love you so much they give you a break. Whereas a Sangha won't give you a break. I'm sure you've noticed, those of you in the Sangha who have been here for a few years, notice that not everybody, your Dharma brothers and sisters, are that nice to be around. When I say that, I'm saying they should be, but it's the Sangha. The Sangha is a group of people who you probably wouldn't choose for conventional kinds of friends, but you're kind of forced to deal with this cross section of humanity called Sangha. People from all different kinds of karmic situations want the truth, and if you happen to have a teacher or a community in common and a teaching in common, then you might find yourself with other people who are practicing that are not for you to be around. Just like, was it Melissa? Yeah, like Melissa, I think Melissa shows up on Open Heart. Yeah. And so that's a kind of Sangha. It's not, it's not quite as as strong as a Sangha that meets in a building over and over again in a monastery. It's not as strong as that, but it's pretty strong considering the COVID season and so on, and that we're doing this, that we're using Zoom like 20 times more than we did a year ago. We've used it a year ago, but it's really the only thing we have right now that is safe. Thank you for the question. Further questions?
Thank you, Belly. A question from R.B. Watts. Would my belief in my own single identity be just as disordered? bowing.
Yeah, but it may not feel that, your particular life might be, you're on this screen, so you have some kind of curiosity going on based on Buddha's teaching. Maybe you're a student of the Buddha. Maybe you already have a Sangha. Maybe you are the Buddha. From my point of view, you are. You might not know it. So your own identity is not to be gotten rid of or shoved out the door. It's to be seen to be unreal. If you see it as unreal, then it can do anything it wants. It can sit on your lap. It can yell in your ears. It can warn you of oncoming bad weather. I'm not kidding. I mean, you don't have to get rid of anything. You don't have to. Transcending things is a misunderstanding. To get rid of, it. But any kind of belief in your own or substantiation in that based on accomplishing something or being a great violinist or a great artist or anything like that, where you're using that to shore up shaky identity. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're addressing, but you don't have to shore up something that's unreal. You don't have to get rid of it. You don't have to do anything with it. It's quite funny if you see it. You will stop being scared of anything.
Junji bowing. A question from Josh in Kalamazoo.
Yes, Josh.
In my experience, looking into the subject of aliens and consciousness tends to lead to spiritual materialism. How can this be avoided? Bowing.
Well, it's about awareness. It's not about avoiding spiritual materialism. Somebody who's aware of spiritual materialism is probably not going to be hooked by it. You realize that, but I'm just giving you this list because I'm thinking if I'm going to use that as a title, then maybe you might want to have some kind of reference points if you want to go any further. I'm not even recommending you do it. That would be up to you. And if you're saying that leads to spiritual materialism, I'm not sure how that would show up other than just trying to find out stuff that can somehow, I don't know. I think it's so individual. I think it's interesting to read about, and it's astonishing how much material is out there that goes in that direction, but in all kinds of directions dealing with deep layers of consciousness that most of the world, including the modern science, it can't find any proof there in the intermediate state. But if I say, and this is my simple way of talking about it, if I say, imagine a yellow balloon, and now it's floating away. So which way did it go? Or was it yellow or was it blue? I mean, I did say balloon. I didn't say yellow balloon, or did I? Yeah, I did. Okay, I lied. I meant blue. You see what I'm saying? I mean, as soon as I do that, notice what happens in your mind. If you have any visual imagination at all, something's going to happen. And if you don't, your conceptual mind will jump in there and make some kind of a structure that allows you to conceptually refer to the color that you can receive through your visual consciousness as blue. Some people don't particularly have a strong visual imagination. Not wrong. Usually they're incredibly receptive in terms of sound. Or maybe they're just a French chef. So I'm just saying that
Kevin bowing.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
I don't personally feel that I experience a lot of interaction with unseen realms, and yet I wonder if what artists experience as creativity might that be some interaction with unseen realms or other consciousnesses.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's going on for sure. But it can go on with somebody, they won't even know that. There's some novelists who actually get their material from apparent other lifetimes. They just tell about the other lifetime. There's material like that all over the place. And then there's we have artists right here in this group right here who operate out of that area. Not just one, but several who actually have. But it's ordinary to them, so they do this all the time. So it's not anything super extraordinary or unique. It's their everyday mind is like this. We have all these human beings here, but everybody's operating with a different range of perception in terms of deeper levels of consciousness. More, Kevin?
Kevin bowing. If that's not something that one is acutely aware of, is it worthwhile investigating that relationship or looking at the source in a more curious way, or should you just keep going? My business.
Okay, so are those the only two, either or, the only two I get? Can I another one?
Yeah, knock yourself out.
Okay, thanks. I probably won't go unconscious, but I'm going to take your advice. Okay, so I would say don't come to any conclusion about it. I mean, you're listening to this talk, so you're thinking about it a little bit. But if none of this sticks with you, or if you're not have no curiosity about the names I've read, please don't investigate anything. On the other hand, continue to, since you're a student of mine, continue to go to the wall, face the wall, and watch what moves, train your mind. And the reason I say I don't want to take one of your choices, because 3 weeks from now, you may have an experience that causes you to, because it's something you're receiving, and I don't know what your karma is like, but you may find that just by hearing some of this, and this quite often is the case, when you hear about this material, other things start to show up in different directions. So I would say then I would always say don't do anything unless you have to, as you heard me say hundreds of times. You're just basically, by doing anything unless you have to, you're just kind of imitating enlightenment, because there isn't a hell of a lot to do. But if you think there is, then we start to dig a trench in our karma. So when the body-mind collapses, then we have that huge trench to deal with. Save all beings.
Kevin bowing. I guess.
Go ahead, please.
Sorry.
No, you.
I guess what's showing up for me is that quite often, as a creative person, I may second guess impulses that arise as being like a dumb idea I had. Whereas if I consider it from a more open dynamic, as maybe receiving something from another source, I might actually be more curious about it and give it the benefit of the doubt more. Bowing.
I wouldn't do anything with it. But now that you've said that, if you find yourself moving that direction, then things are dependently arisen. You hear this, I present a talk. I mean, I didn't have to think too long about the talk title, and I realized I might be getting an audience that might not have any interest in meditation at all, but I don't care. But I would say don't do anything unless you have to. The most important thing you can do if you're listening to me is train your mind to see clearly. So anything that does arise, you'll be less likely to be looking at presumptions about it that you think are the thing itself, and more likely to be looking at the situation itself, which could be, I'm just saying could be, not just may never happen, probably will never happen, could be another entity, could be another consciousness, or not, but not important. I'm not interested in getting anybody to change gears, but this is just a Dharma talk that I'm giving from a particular direction. Some people already deal with this kind of situation all the time. And some people, one more thing, Michael, some people, their life is so completely clogged with this kind of, no one here, but sometimes people are so clogged by this that they can't even hardly function. And what does modern science do with them? Medicates them. Not a good idea to cover up symptoms with lumps of jelly beans, so you can't experience them, and it stops you from experiencing your life. It's just a primitive approach that modern medicine, so-called, takes. I'm just saying you could do this with your awareness. This doesn't mean you might not need to take some aspirin, but it could be situational rather than just this is what you have, this is what you take. Certificate's on my wall, therefore I'm telling you what to do. You should trust me because I'm the authority. Not that it might not be helpful. Maybe you should, but you could think about it a little bit before you immediately leap into this drug or this protocol or that one, or even meditation. Even meditation, if somebody said, should I meditate? I don't know. Do you need to meditate? Not really. I said, well, no, then don't. Nothing's promoted particularly, unless if you're listening to me, then I'd say train your mind. Sit down, hold still, and watch the movement. So eventually you see the way that structure works to block out this and to grasp that and to shut down, go to war with something else. Further questions?
Michael Bowing,
Yes, Michael.
is just the simple act of quantifying or judging this other consciousnesses or this creative thought, is it just that simple act to make a judgment that stops any communication?
Yes. Communication is about receiving. It's not about producing. Producing is producing. Creativity is actually receiving in a profoundly sincere way. And you could even say with great humility. And this includes Pablo Picasso, who is not particularly humble. But he could not have produced the work that he produced without, nor could Matisse or Degas or Jackson Pollock, for that matter, unless they really received what was happening there in the world of color and shape. Just use that as an example. So yeah, don't judge anything. The musician, the artist, someone who is creative in a particular discipline or area is not particularly judging. They're not judging something. If they're judging, then they probably are not. They might be somewhat creative, but their full creativity has not been, you could say, unleashed, because there's still some person that's worried about success and failure, right and wrong, up and down, back and forth. Materialism, artistic materialism, sometimes called Norman Rockwell, who, by the way, was an incredible illustrator, just amazing illustrator, but was not creative in the same way that someone like Degas, Matisse, the other artists I've mentioned.
And then Michael Bowing, then what effect does having taken credit for what you've received?
Give me an example.
I post a picture and say, "See my great picture."
Yeah, I do that all the time. Just it's how else do you get adored? So, that I'm not sure what you're actually asking me there. I mean, people are, I like people to look at something that I've done, quite often say, I've done this, I've done that, creating things. So there's nothing amiss about someone admiring something you've made, or if that's what you're asking me, I'm not sure.
Well, I guess I'm asking about it. It sometimes seems to me that if you go ahead and take credit, you're also shutting down on communication.
Yeah, maybe. But it's just to be observed rather than changed or modified. And so you don't have to get rid of something that is unreal. So if there's some kind of vanity arising there around, or feeling kind of puffed up about somebody enjoying something you've made, you don't have to stop that. You can't try to be humble. You can't have humility. You may, if that is something that could be described that way or shows up that way, it would be other people would be thinking that. You wouldn't think that particularly. You might think you're not doing so well, but you're also not particularly puffed up or pretentious about who you are, what you think, what you know, how you look, what you create. Understanding goes deeper than just a separate being who makes stuff or creates stuff.
Michael Bowing, I also have a question about someone who has all of a sudden passed.
Yes.
is it possible for them not to know that they've passed?
Yes. Quite often that happens.
Is it possible to assist them then?
The best thing you can do is leave them alone. But if they come to you, if that consciousness comes to you, let them know and be very general about it. Just let them know. If you feel like that is present, just say, oh, by the way, you probably have noticed that you've died. You'll be all right. Keep it very ordinary. That'd be a lot more supportive to that consciousness. And I'm not even assuming there is one. That could be an aspect of your consciousness. It could be an aspect of Brett's consciousness, or David's, or Mark's, or anyway. We're really not as separate from each other as we look. So, but yeah, just be kind. That's all you have to remember. Be kind. No correction, no scolding, nothing. Just very simple, straightforward. Sokuzan, go ahead. Sokuzan?
Sokuzan bowing. I have a question, and also there's a question from Teresa in the chat box.
Go with yours first.
Sokuzan bowing. In amidst Sangha, in book study, everything about Sangha, there seems to be a lot of discursive thought arising.
Yeah.
Is discursive thought an obstacle to practice?
So it can be if we fight with it. In other words, we try to push it away so we have more space. Or if we try to, that's the aggression part, or if we try to blame someone, ourselves, passion, blame someone else, or try to find some reason it's happening, or what's the support behind it, to actually trace down something to some kind of a relative source so we can scold it or not like it or be upset with it or ignore it or whatever, have some kind of control. And so the important thing to, as I understand the way you're asking it, is just receive that. Just notice, you've already done something with it by calling it discursive thought. If you can see behind the label discursive thought, which is has a relative accuracy, but there may be another level of consciousness or awareness or object, some kind of a more subtle objectivity that is arising there that is being laminated with that statement, so that you don't have to see fundamentally what it is. When I say fundamentally, I'm just saying more deeply. You may never get to the fundamental situation, but more deeply. So you could, when that arises and you call it discursive, then just look at the quality of that. Just look at the surface of the naming of discursive means. Just rambling thought patterns, just gossipy kind of thought patterns that come and go. If that's what you're referring to, is that what you're referring to? Yeah, just receive. And what is Teresa's question? Do you have hers?
Sokuzan bowing. Teresa asks, what is happening in the consciousness of those with what is called split mind or schizophrenia?
Yeah, it's just a divided consciousness. And I'm not saying there isn't some kind of a chemical structure under that is sometimes addressed by medicine that may help people. So I'm not here to wipe out medicine. I'm just saying they're not always on the spot. They want to know. They want to know and control so much that they'll come up with something to either cover it up or control it. Might be good to actually look at that. If someone has mind training, meditation practice, and uses this particular form, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, different way of working with it. And you can't do it in a couple of years. You can't do it may not be able to even do it at all. There's no guarantee of anything, but you could start. So look at the divisions, see what's looking at what. Is one part looking at the other part? Is the other part looking at the other part? If you see what this is, it won't be a problem. You can have all the personalities you want. I do. I'm not particularly having a problem with anything in particular other than my broken arm. That's not fun. But that's that other part of my personality is having that. So we can talk about situations that are, psychosis, schizophrenia, and all that. They're labels that have a relative accuracy to them. I've been working with that for modern psychiatry and so on, and have been working with that for a long time. So I'm not saying there isn't something that is accurate there and couldn't be worked with in a relative way by someone without any mind training who's just trying to help that person using whatever, Wellbutrin or to settle some things down, or antipsychotic meds and so on. I'm not saying those aren't somewhat workable. Maybe that's the only thing you can do. It's possible. So I'm not trying to rule out all of that. I'm just saying you could look at see if you can possibly do this yourself with your awareness, with your own mind, rather than to rely on some other thing. Sometimes you can't help but rely on something else. If you have a headache, you might need to take aspirin or something else.
Sokuzan.
Shoka.
Along those same lines with diagnoses like that, having worked in a psychiatric facility, sometimes people might have an experience or have contact with these deeper layers of consciousness, and the people around them will involuntarily admit them to a psychiatric hospital where they are force-fed drugs.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, what does it mean to fundamentally support or help somebody who's in that kind of a situation?
Protect them from danger. I mean, you may have to do something with them if they're doing something dangerous, either to themselves or to others. So protect them, but give them some kind of, again, meet them where they're at and see if they're ready for any kind of fundamental work. It can be very, very simple. If you meet somebody where they're at, then you'll see what's happening. You'll understand if you've met yourself where you're at. If you know who you are, if you're confused about who you are, you're going to have trouble with others because you'll project your own unexamined confusion on others and think it's them. You know about that. You do it. Am I accusing you of something? Would I do something like that? We all do that. I do that. That's how I know about it. Project onto others and think that the emotion or feeling that we're having is over there. The person who is disturbed in the way that you're talking about, and we've talked about that a while back when you were working there, we talked about that several times. And I would say, meet people where they're at. Like the person who didn't want to have, that you told me about, we don't have to go into that because it's kind of a long story, but the person who didn't want to have their blood sugar tested. And I think I said something about, well, just find a way to, what their energy is and find a way to interact with them. I don't know what I said, but try to have a little humor about it and play with them a little bit. And you got their blood sugar taken because you met them where they're at. So the people are, their craziness, their insanity, or their psychosis is also dependently arisen. But what it is dependent on is much different than what is our civilization is dependent on. So our civilization is what? Civilized, which is also dependent on origination, called culture, civilization. Shut up.
Bowing. This is how a certain situation looks to me, but it seems like when someone new finds out that there's a venue like deep consciousness work to work with that, it kind of solidifies that other quality, maybe in a way that gives them handles to work with it. But how does working with deep consciousness in a way that increases that separation help in a way that covering it up with medicine doesn't help?
I don't know that it does. We're just, we're all, mentioned a frontier. We're all on a frontier. We're doing the best we can with what we know, what we understand. And if your intention is to help people, then you might have to crawl through a lot of weeds and brambles and go through an area that's difficult to navigate, especially if you're trying to help someone who is stuck in that, who is stuck in it because they believe what's happening to them. Whereas if you're training your mind to not believe, not disbelieve, or not look away, there isn't any place you can't go.
is it important to not offer that kind of help?
Yeah, it's pretty dependent on your relationship to that person. If you're, if they're your partner, then that's a different system. That's totally your situation. But if the person is down the hall or across the street or part of the Sangha or is an acquaintance, then maybe you should hold up a little bit unless you're asked specifically. And I think it's dependent. It's very situational. So rather than set up something like you're asking a question and I can't really respond to that as yes, no, maybe, but it's like talking to Kevin earlier. He gave me an either or, and I said I don't know, because 3 days from now or 4 days from now you might have forgotten the whole thing, not even interested, doing something else. He's working on a book, I know that, and maybe just working on that and maybe not thinking about it too much. But something else might show up where maybe I need to look into some more of this, and then then Kevin could talk to me some more. He could look at these are just a few books that go in different directions. There's countless material in this. Is just really extensive. It shows you what's been going on for centuries. Further question about that, Shoto?
Are we helping to create a problem by giving it an area to be addressed in?
I don't think so. I mean, the way you're asking me the question, I don't think so. So I don't think it might be too careful, too strategic about it. You don't have to do that. You can relax and go in and just know that you're not going to abuse someone particularly. And you will get a signal right away that maybe you're going too far in that area. So you can kind of dance with the situation a little bit. I'm not trying to be particularly vague, but it is a little bit hard to say because it's so situational. If a person is really having a great deal of difficulty with something and you're the only one there, you might do something with that or suggest something to that person that you might never have suggested if they were just didn't seem to have anything particular going on except just a few little complaints about this and that. Whereas if they're somehow terrorized by what's happening, then you might want to engage more closely, especially if it's somebody you know really well. And am I coming anywhere near to helping you with that, or does it just sound more vague? Or I gave you an either or.
I felt like that was really helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Well, good. Yes, Junshu.
A question from Shoshi.
Shoshi.
How do I identify my intention to help?
Well, probably the first thing, I don't know if it's the first thing, but you could see, look at your intention. If your intention is to help, then look if there's any streamers on that, little things you tack on like pilot fish on a whale, that are just feeding off the situation that have to do with your particular ego or your pride or your self-centeredness, where you're really doing this because you want to be a person who helps. And you want people to acknowledge that you're a person who helps, even though your motivation for doing it is to appear as a person who's helpful. Quite often people have whole professions that are about how they appear and not about fundamentally helping people. This doesn't mean that nurses aren't helping people. Of course they are. Or dentists, or all kinds of people are being helpful. But a lot of times the motivation behind that is about the identity of being that kind of a person. So I would just be, if you're doing a lot of sitting practice, which Shoshi, I hope you are, you can look at that on the cushion. You can also write it on a Post-it note or an index card, lay it in front of your zafu. Sit there for 3 or 4 hours. And at the end of the 3 or 4 hours, some block sitting, then look down and contemplate that. And it can be a simple thing like, what are my intentions? What is an intention? What is my intention to help? So that takes you from the open space of wall gazing down to the completely hall of mirrors of the thinking process, which is very like structure. The walls won't reflect anything for a while, but if you continue to look at it, you'll you'll see what this is. Do a lot of it.
Bowing. He has a follow-up.
Very good.
If all conceptual thinking is fundamentally illusion, how is it possible to identify intention?
Persistence, because the concept of the conclusion that it's all illusion, or the teaching that it's all illusion, is not what's being pointed at. That's a concept about it. So that's the recipe about it. But you'll starve looking at a recipe. You actually have to eat the recipe. No, don't do that. You have to actually do that. You have to actually do that, so that way the causes and conditions that are arising in any given situation, you're no longer for, against, or shutting down on. This is just a way of interacting with being a living being as dependent origination, where you're not buying into anything, you're not selling anything, you're not ignoring anything. That's how it's done. And it takes a while. It can't be done in 3 weeks, 3 years. It takes a while.
That's your final question.
Final question, if you have it. It can be about aliens if you want to ask me about aliens. Nobody wants to laugh about aliens. Okay, good. We'll dedicate the merit then. Yes, go ahead. You have another one?
A question from Benjamin, I think in Florida.
Yes, Benjamin.
Do the aliens have a relative separate self? How can I meet them and laugh at them?
Mm-hmm. Well, don't laugh at them necessarily. So when I say laughing at aliens, I was talking about the news reporters that were kind of mocking the whole situation as if that was just a big joke. Everybody knows there's no aliens. So I would say, in response to the first part of your question, it's hard to know about that. Even our consciousnesses are not separate in the way we think they are. We think we're some kind of a separate being, but the overlapping is all over the place and under the place and on top of the place. It's and that also is an aspect of phenomena, which is also what? Dependently arisen. You can't, if something's there, it's dependently arisen. Even consciousness. You can disagree with me. I'd be happy to discuss it with you, or listen to what you have to say at least. Okay, we can dedicate the merit. From the monastery, please.
Into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jiho San Shi 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 Sangha Sa Mo Sa The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect SokukoJi Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.